this is Mrs. Murdock, and this is a review session on alternate pathways of cellular respiration. So here we go. I'm just going to write on this. And you've already gone over this with me before. We've already talked about it once. Oh, it doesn't want me to do that. Okay. It's not letting me. Oh, because I'm upside down. Yes, upside down, Mrs. Murdock. Yep. Been that kind of a day. So alternate pathways of cellular respiration. And by cellular respiration, we really mean aerobic respiration. Right? So fats or lipids have one way they go. Carbohydrates like glucose is the one we mainly learned about, right? You guys know that one the best. And proteins have their own way to go too. So I'm kind of going to go pretty fast through this. Let's first do the center one. Glucose, when it's going through aerobic pathways, the first thing that it does is it goes into glycolysis. So glycolysis takes that 6-carbon glucose and breaks it down and releases that minimal 2 ATP that we know about. And then this is the link reaction. Well, actually, this is pyruvate, sorry. So we make 2 pyruvates here, which you remember is a 2-carbon compound. And then the pyruvates turn into acetyl-CoA. I'm sorry, 3-carbon. I'm terrible today. Please forgive me. This is pyruvates are 3 carbons. Acetyl-CoA is when it goes to 2 carbons. And the number of carbons, keeping track of those is very useful as far as orienting ourselves on what's happening to the molecules, right? So the glucose is broken down into 2 3-carbon pyruvates, and you get 2 ATP from that. And then the pyruvates go into the mitochondria. And in the mitochondria, a carbon is broken off as carbon dioxide, and they turn into 2 carbon units. And then those 2 carbon units go down and enter the, whoops, please just work. Just work. Come on, down, 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 down. There we go. Okay. Enter the Krebs cycle, which is 10, right? You remember that. That Krebs cycle, which is circular and happens in the matrix of the mitochondria. So now we're in the mitochondria. You get a little bit more ATP from that, but not very much. You get these very important electron carriers from that, and we know that's where the money is, right? With the high energy electrons in there. And then it's those high energy electrons that go to the ETC, that last final step of aerobic respiration, which gives us the biggest payoff here, right? Okay. So that's the first basic pathway that you learned about in terms of glucose does this and this and this and this. So the carbohydrates have their pathway. But you should also remember that you don't just eat carbohydrates. You also eat lipids and you eat fats. So what happens with those? And we had talked about that. Come on, up, back up here. Okay. So lipids, remember that lipids are 2 components to a lipid. You've got glycerol, that's part of a fat, and then you have fatty acids that are the other part of a fat. And if you read the book, you remember that the glycerol kind of looks like a 3-carbon thing like this, right? So this is 3 carbons going in. And then the fatty acids are huge. They're really, really long hydrocarbon chains. These are the fatty acids, and they have carbons and hydrogens that go on forever. Bless you. And they have a lot of energy stored in those, right? Lipids are a long-term storage energy molecule. We learned that the very first month of class. And to get the energy out of them, what happens is, I mean, you have like up to lots of carbons, right? Lots of carbons. And you remember that what we do is we cut them into 2 carbon pieces. The enzymes take a fatty acid, then cut them into 2 carbon pieces. Lots of them from 1 fatty acid. You can get a lot out of that. So the 3-carbon glycerol kind of goes into glycolysis. Remember, there's a point in glycolysis where you have a 3-carbon phosphoglyceraldehyde, and you can get a little bit of ATP out of that, right? So the glycerol, the single little glycerol, goes in here and enters glycolysis a little lower down than a glucose molecule would. And it goes through those same enzymes that are in the cytoplasm, and you get a little bit of ATP from that. But a 2-carbon molecule has to enter a little bit lower because there aren't any 2-carbon molecules in glycolysis. So the 2-carbon molecules go all the way down to the acetyl-CoA, right? You've got these 2-carbon units can be converted into acetyl group and connected to the coenzyme and then enter the Krebs cycle. So you have a whole bunch of 2-carbon units that can go into the Krebs cycle and contribute to the electrons being given to the electron carriers, and then you can get go to the ETC and get your ATP that way. So you can burn a lot of fat and you can get a lot of ATP from fat. But usually the first place your body goes to is the glucose. That body cells, any cells in fact, prefer glucose to fat. They'll use the glucose up first, and then they'll go to fats second. If you've ever been on a diet, where a lot of times you'll have a low carbohydrate diet, right? Well, they say don't eat the sugars, and that way, if your body doesn't have any sugars to go to, it'll go and burn your fat for you, right? So low carb, low fat diet, if you're eating a lot of protein and just staying with salads and things like that, your body won't have those things to digest, and instead will go and burn your fat for you. That's why you have diets that eliminate carbs from them. Okay, let's go back up. Now, what do the proteins do? Just very quickly. Proteins' building blocks are amino acids, aren't they? Remember that we have amino acids, okay? Welcome. And amino acids, remember, look like this. You got a COOH on one side, you got a little H sticking up, and you have a nitrogen group over here, right? And then you have some kind of R group here that can be any of 20 different things. So you may remember, we have talked about this already. Nitrogen is something that doesn't appear anywhere in this story. Is that giving me such a hard time? No. There we go. Oh, there. Okay, so nitrogen can't be processed in the mitochondria of the cytoplasm. The enzymes aren't designed to do anything with nitrogen. So what happens to the nitrogen? It goes into our urine, right? Remember that? That the nitrogen that's cut off from that amino acid is going into your urine and being peed out because that is a waste. So we get rid of the nitrogen part of the amino acids, but the rest of the amino acid can be very useful. It still has carbons and hydrogens and oxygens on it, and that can fit into our pathways. So if we go up here, for example, if this is cut off, right, you take that off, you're still left with, at the very least, a 2-carbon molecule. So the 2-carbon molecule can go in here, right? So any 2-carbon amino acid, if you're left with that, can become acetyl-CoA and can go in that way. You might even have a 3-carbon, like if you have a central carbon, a COOH, and then an R group that has a single carbon on it. You've got a 3-carbon chain, which could go in here, right? 3-carbon chain can, sorry, not here, here. The 3-carbon chain can be converted to pyruvates and then go into the link reaction there. 4-carbon is what comes down here. So a 4-carbon piece that comes off an amino acid, remember that there's a 4-carbon intermediate that comes up to meet the 2-carbon that comes in here to become the 6-carbon here. I know I'm going really fast, but just forgive me. You can go and look at it. So amino acids can be processed, lipids can be processed, carbohydrates can all be processed and used to make ATP. Now, what if something goes wrong? Okay, so let's look at Asian flush first, because that was hopefully an interesting YouTube that you all got to watch. Asian flush, I'm just going to write this over here. Asian flush is the phenomenon where there is a genetic issue in some members of the Asian population, which makes it difficult for them to process alcohol. So when they have a drink, their skin flushes pink, and it doesn't take much at all. Only one drink, and it causes enough of a disruption for them to flush pink, and for people around them to think, oh my goodness, you're drunk. When in fact they're not. It's not their fault at all. It's a genetic anomaly that causes the following. So what happens is this. If you drink alcohol, which is a 2-carbon compound with an OH on the end of it, okay? Basically, ethanol is the potable type of alcohol that people can drink. That's in beer, that's in wine, that's in whiskey. It's the same type of alcohol, just different flavoring. So this is alcohol, right? This is alcohol. I just didn't write the extra hydrogens in. So usually, we would put it in here at this level. It would become acetyl-CoA, and it would enter and be digested properly, and there'd be no problem. With a person that has Asian flush, this gets disrupted. So it's supposed to become acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is what it is supposed to become. And then it can be converted to acetate. Acetate, which then can enter and be correctly broken down by the Krebs cycle enzymes. The problem is that the enzyme that converts acetaldehyde to acetate doesn't function or is in the wrong shape in a person who has Asian flush. So the enzyme that normally allows this conversion isn't working, and that is directly caused by genetics. The gene for that enzyme has a mutation in it, and it's not working. So that means that this acetaldehyde right here, which is a 2-carbon compound that looks a lot like acetate, but is slightly different, and it won't go in with these enzymes over here. This builds up. This builds up in the blood, right? Because the alcohol, which is pretty toxic, and you want to change that right away, has been successfully converted into acetaldehyde, which isn't as toxic as the alcohol. But then the acetaldehyde is never converted into acetate, which then goes right through into the Krebs cycle. So acetaldehyde builds up. And that's what causes the pinkness in the cheeks and the inflammatory response. And eventually the person will digest it, and it will go away. But in the meantime, they get that reaction. Yeah.
Are there like lumps or liquids? Like, is it gases?
You know, that's a very good question. I'm not really sure. I think most people who have the condition, and not all Asians do, it's about 30 or 40% of Asian populations that have it. There's some indigenous people, Native Americans also, who have that condition. It tends to be uncomfortable enough for them to drink that they just won't drink, right? But it is an interesting question, yes.
Did they say they were like more severe with type of cancer or something in the video? It was like something that
I think there are some consequences that if you have the condition where that enzyme doesn't work and you build up acetaldehyde often because you take a glass of wine and a bottle of beer now and then. But I'm not really up on all of that detail. I can give you this pathway, and I can tell you what the symptom is, and we can talk about the genes later, but that's all I've got, I'm afraid. So hopefully that is enough. The only other thing that I wanted to mention, and I hope I have time to do it, is cyanide. Cyanide is the other thing that can disrupt this. Do you remember where cyanide is disruptive? It's a poison, right? Okay? And the reason why it's a poison and why it's such a lethal poison is it messes with this. Specifically, it prevents oxygen from accepting those electrons.